Thank you, Mr Deputy President. I want to rise to contribute briefly to this debate. It's something which is quite close to my heart, and I thought I'd give the House the benefit of a personal experience when I was back in the trade back in the 80s. But before I do, I want to thank my colleague, the Honourable Adam Searle, for bringing this very, very important piece of legislation to the House, and also my other colleague, Anthony D'Adam, who's made 2 speeches on this, an adjournment and a PMS, and worked on the bill to a degree with my colleague, Adam Searle. This is a very, very important piece of legislation because safety in the workplace in New South Wales has largely relied on a goodwill, proactive approach on behalf of the employer, and without any culpability on their behalf in the event of industrial manslaughter. Back in the 80s, I was an apprentice for what was then known as the Sydney County Council. People would now know it as Ausgrid. About 16, 17 years old, 2nd or 3rd year apprentice, was in the middle of winter. Fortunately, for me, it was in the middle of winter because I had several layers of clothing on. We were asked to go out to a pole transformer out at Kurnell and take what we call full load readings, which involved climbing up the pole transformer and leaning out on a body belt with a tong ammeter to measure the load on that particular transformer so that it feeds into statistics and they could tell where they needed to put in extra capacity. I went out that particular day with a gentleman who was on loan from another section who was not familiar with working on live mains and apparatus. So they put a 2nd year apprentice out with a tradesperson, qualified tradesperson, but nevertheless someone who was not familiar with working on live mains and apparatus. Quite a special skill set and requires a fair bit of awareness about what's going on around you and safety considerations. So this fellow told me to hop up onto the pole transformer and lean out and take these measurements, you see. Now, I'm up the pole on top of the ladder and I couldn't quite reach the furthest phase to measure the current. So I said, look, what am I going to do? I can't reach this. And he just said, look, just hop up on top of the transformer. Now, those transformers, if people have been observant, they have 11,000 volt leads feeding them on the high voltage end, and they're covered with what looks like black insulation, but the black insulation is actually not rated. It's simply a covering for mechanical protection. And being a 2nd year apprentice and not being perhaps as switched on as I should have been, I didn't realise that this was the case. So I willingly took the instruction to jump up on a transformer. Now, what you do when you put yourself in those situations is you're effectively providing a path to earth, sitting on a metal transformer, and I'm sitting on that transformer trying to measure the current and feeling tingling up my back, you see, because the 11,000 volts was leaking through the covered cable and tracking down through my body. Now, had it not been winter, in 1983 or 4, whatever it was, I would have been wearing shorts in those days, short sleeve shirt, probably sweating a bit, you know, still young, and being dead. I would not be here talking to you today. There is no doubt about it whatsoever. Fortunately, I had long pants on, and I had a singlet, a shirt, and a jumper, which was enough to prevent the tingling from being a high voltage shock. Now, that situation is caused by the organisation, and this, we're talking about a government-owned instrumentality at the time who were quite good on safety, probably cutting edge at the time, but still, nevertheless, quite blasé, and who took a proactive approach to safety, but there was no punitive action against them. There was no compulsion on their behalf, no liability had they put apprentices in this situation. And I remember getting back to the depot at the time, it was Miranda Depot, and I can distinctly remember the poor old leading hand's face when I told him what had happened. I said, you know, I got up on that transformer and there was tingling. Are those droppers, are they rated insulation? and the blood, I could see the blood draining from his face. And he said, no, they're just covering. You don't treat them as insulation. Why did you get up there? And I said, well, X told me to jump up there because I couldn't reach the... And he was just shocked. And look, the point about this legislation is that it forces a top-down culture of safety. If people know that there are very real penalties and they can be held personally liable and collectively liable, then it inculcates it mandates a safety culture and psychology from the top right down, so that people move heaven and earth to make sure not just apprentices but anyone is not put in a vulnerable situation like that. And that goes to all sorts of things, not least of which is adequate training on WHS and safety, the awareness of what's around you, what can go wrong. The approach we see in industry today is largely one of cover my backside, also known as hazard assessment checks, hazard alerts. So what your average tradie will do today on a work site is go out to the work site and do a risk analysis and tick a series of boxes to say, well, that's a hazard, there's exposed electricity there, or there's scaffolding there. I've taken adequate precautions to eliminate that hazard. So that when an accident happens, the paperwork's produced and Safe Work can say, oh, well, you went through the hazard check, the company's done everything it should, they gave you the hazard assessment, and it's more about a system of paper trail to prove that something's been done rather than a substantive attempt to inform the worker and not place the worker in those situations. The only way you will guarantee and inculcate that culture is to have this punitive approach whereby employers are well aware that if they don't move heaven and earth to make sure that the workplace is safe, both from a practical and a psychological training point of view, then it won't be done. So I think it's a very, very laudable bill. I think it will make a very, very practical change to workers on the ground and, and prevent the situation I was put in, so that had it been summer, I would have still been alive had this legislation been in place. As I said, the only reason I'm here is because it was winter and it was pure luck. So again, I commend the work of my colleague, the Honourable Adam Searle, on putting it forward, commend the bill to the House, and I'd ask that the House support it fully. Thanks.
The Honourable Peter Primrose.